In 2008, two neighbors lost their jobs on the same day. Same street, same industry, same savings. 5 years later, one had rebuilt a thriving business. The other was still buried in debt, blaming the economy. What separated them wasn't intelligence, education, or even luck. It was something psychologists call financial resilience. And it's built on 9 specific mental habits that have nothing to do with how much money you make. Financial resilience sounds like something you'd read on a motivational poster. But in behavioral psychology, it's a measurable trait. It's the ability to absorb a financial shock and return to stability without permanent damage to your long-term goals. And here's the strange part. It's not correlated with income the way you'd think. Researchers at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau studied thousands of Americans who experienced job loss, medical emergencies, or divorce. They found that people earning $70,000 a year were just as likely to recover quickly as those earning $200,000. The difference wasn't the size of their bank account. It was how their brain processed financial threat. Most of us think financial security is about having enough money, but psychologically, resilience is about having enough flexibility. It's the difference between a rigid tree that snaps in a storm and a palm tree that bends. The rigid tree has one strategy: grow tall, stay strong, don't move. The palm tree has 9. These 9 rules aren't about budgeting hacks or investment tips. They're about rewiring the psychological defaults that make financial setbacks either temporary or catastrophic. Because when your income disappears, your investment tanks, or your business fails, your bank balance matters less than your brain's ability to adapt. Let's start with the first rule, and it's one that goes against every instinct you have when money gets tight. It's called maintaining optionality. In psychology, this is related to the concept of cognitive flexibility. It's your brain's ability to shift strategies when your current one stops working. But here's what most people do instead. When financial stress hits, they double down. They cling harder to their current plan, their current job, their current business model, because changing course feels like admitting failure. This is loss aversion in action. The pain of abandoning your current path feels twice as strong as the potential gain of trying something new. So you stay put. You work harder at the thing that's already failing. You throw good money after bad. Psychologists call this the sunk cost fallacy. And it's the first thing that separates the resilient from the fragile. Blockbuster Video had every advantage in 2000. $5 billion in revenue, 9,000 stores, 60,000 employees. When a small startup called Netflix offered to sell itself to Blockbuster for $50 million, Blockbuster's CEO John Antioco declined, not because the price was too high, because the entire leadership team couldn't imagine a world where people didn't drive to a store to rent movies. This wasn't stupidity, it was psychological rigidity. Blockbuster had one mental model for how their business worked. Late fees generated 16% of their revenue, about $800 million a year. Netflix wanted to eliminate late fees entirely. To Blockbuster's leadership, this felt like suicide. They had what psychologists call a fixed mindset around their revenue model. Every decision filtered through the same question: how do we get more people into stores? They optimized their existing strategy brilliantly. Better locations, more inventory, faster checkout. But they never asked the second question: what if stores become irrelevant? By 2010, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy. Netflix had 20 million subscribers. The difference wasn't that Netflix was smarter, it's that they maintained optionality. They started with DVDs by mail, then shifted to streaming, then to original content. Each pivot looked risky. Each one contradicted their previous strategy. But each one kept them alive. Financially resilient people do this at a personal level. They don't just have a plan B. They have a plan B, C, D, and E running simultaneously in their head, not because they're pessimistic, but because they understand that the economy doesn't care about your plans. When one income stream dries up, they already know 3 others they could activate. When their industry contracts, they've already been learning adjacent skills. This is Rule 1. Maintain multiple options at all times. Never let your financial survival depend on a single employer, a single client, a single investment, or a single strategy, because the moment you do, you're Blockbuster.
You're psychologically locked into a path that might disappear overnight. In the 1960s, psychologist Julian Rotter developed a concept called locus of control. It measures whether you believe your outcomes are controlled by your actions or by external forces. People with an internal locus of control believe they shape their own results. People with an external locus of control believe they're at the mercy of luck, the economy, their boss, or the system. This distinction predicts financial resilience better than almost any other personality trait. And it's not because internal locus people are more talented, it's because of what happens after a setback. When someone with an external locus loses their job, their brain goes straight to blame. The company was corrupt. The manager had favorites. The economy is rigged.
And here's the trap. They might be right. But right or wrong, blame is psychologically expensive. It gives you an explanation, but it steals your agency. If the system is rigged, why bother trying? If success is about luck, why develop new skills? You end up in what psychologists call learned helplessness. You stop taking action because you've convinced yourself action doesn't matter. People with an internal locus of control process the same job loss differently. They don't deny external factors, but they immediately ask, what's within my control? Maybe they can't control the layoff, but they can control how fast they update their resume. They can't control the job market, but they can control who they reach out to. This is rule 2. Always ask, what's the 1% I can control? Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky studied this in their research on cognitive biases. They found that people systematically overestimate how much control they have over outcomes when things are going well, and underestimate it when things go badly. It's a double trap. The financially resilient flip this script. When times are good, they stay humble. They know luck played a role. But when times are bad, they become irrationally optimistic about their own agency. Not because it's true, but because it's useful. Because the moment you believe you're helpless, you stop scanning for opportunities. You stop experimenting. You stop adapting. And in a financial crisis, adaptation is the only currency that matters. Morgan Housel tells a story in The Psychology of Money about a man who made millions in his 20s, lost it all in his 30s, and never recovered psychologically. Not because he couldn't earn money again, but because he couldn't let go of who he used to be. His identity was wrapped around being a millionaire, and when that disappeared, he spent the rest of his life trying to get back to that exact version of himself, instead of building something new. This is rule 3. Hold your money loosely, but your skills tightly. Psychologists call this identity foreclosure. It's when you lock yourself into a single version of who you are, and then defend that identity even when it's destroying you. You see this all the time with people who experience sudden wealth. Lottery winners, athletes, entrepreneurs who sell a company. They build their entire sense of self around having money. They make friends who only know the rich version of them. They develop tastes that require 6 figures to maintain. Then when the money disappears, they can't downgrade. Not because they can't afford to live modestly, but because modest living feels like erasing themselves. The financially resilient do the opposite. They anchor their identity to something portable, their curiosity, their ability to learn, their relationships, their skills, things that can't be repossessed or inflated away. There's a concept in Stoic philosophy that Marcus Aurelius wrote about 2,000 years ago. He said, you're not your possessions, you're not your status, you're not even your accomplishments. You're the quality of your character and the clarity of your thinking. That sounds abstract until you lose everything. And then it becomes the only thing that determines whether you rebuild or collapse. Rule 4 builds on this. Separate your self-worth from your net worth. Because the moment those two things fuse, you've created a psychological fragility that no amount of wealth can fix. You'll be terrified of risk. You'll make defensive decisions. You'll avoid necessary changes because every financial loss feels like a personal failure. The people who recover from financial disasters fastest are the ones who can say, I lost my business, but I'm still a problem solver. I lost my job, but I'm still someone who creates value. I lost my savings, but I still know how to build them back. Identity that bends doesn't break. Let's bring this together. The 9 psychological rules that build financial resilience. We've covered 4. Here are the final 5, and they're just as counterintuitive. Rule 5. Expect disaster, but don't obsess over it. This is called defensive pessimism in psychology. You plan for bad outcomes without letting fear paralyze you. You have an emergency fund not because you're scared,
but because you're realistic. The resilients aren't optimists. They're prepared realists.
Rule 6. Compress your lifestyle.
Not because you have to, but while you don't have to.
This creates what Nassim Taleb calls anti-fragility, the ability to benefit from chaos. If you already live below your means, a 20% income drop is annoying. If you live at your means, it's catastrophic. The difference is entirely psychological preparation. Rule 7. Diversify your identity capital. Don't just be good at one thing. Be useful in multiple contexts. Learn adjacent skills. Build relationships outside your industry. This isn't about being scattered. It's about being psychologically hedged. When one part of the economy collapses, you have other places to create value. Rule 8. Practice small failures.
Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize for his work in behavioral economics, showed that people who experience minor setbacks regularly are better equipped to handle major ones, not because failure feels good, but because your brain learns that setbacks aren't fatal. You build psychological scar tissue. People who've never failed catastrophize failure. People who fail regularly just problem solve.
And Rule 9.
This one comes straight from the research on post-traumatic growth. Reframe every financial setback as information, not punishment. When you lose money, you didn't fail. You learned what doesn't work. When you get laid off, you didn't lose value. You gained data about where not to invest your time. The financially fragile see setbacks as evidence they're unlucky, untalented, or doomed. The financially resilient see the exact same setbacks as education. And that psychological reframe changes everything. Because if it's education, you can use it. If it's punishment, you can only endure it. Think back to those two neighbors who lost their jobs in 2008. Same circumstances. Radically different outcomes. The one who recovered didn't have a secret strategy. He had a different operating system in his brain. He maintained options.
He focused on what he could control.
He didn't tie his identity to his job title. He expected difficulty. He lived below his means. He had multiple skills. He'd failed before, and he treated the layoff as data, not destiny.
Financial resilience isn't built with money. It's built with these 9 mental habits. And the beautiful thing? You can start building them today, regardless of your bank balance. Because resilience is free. It just costs you your old way of thinking.
If this changed how you think about money psychology, you'll want to see why most people's financial advice actually makes them poorer. That video breaks down the psychological traps hiding in common money wisdom.